Do you believe your childhood may have caused post-traumatic stress disorder? What about prolonged grief disorder and chronic stress? These are terms that you are likely to find online if you do a rather quick Google search for childhood trauma. You know, prolonged grief disorder is basically, in a nutshell, the idea that, any situation that we get ourselves into or we experience or somebody puts us through that is traumatic, we actually experience a grief and loss stage. And there's a couple of stages of grief that we have to move through in order to get to acceptance and heal. But in the time that you are trying to heal from trauma or process trauma, you may find it very difficult to not only think about the traumatic situation, process it, right? So really focus on it in your mind and grow from the experience. You may also find it difficult to engage in what I call post-traumatic growth, or what the field calls post-traumatic growth. All of that is the result of what is known as prolonged grief disorder. So in today's video, I'm going to highlight what prolonged grief disorder looks like, and I'm going to try to point out some things that you may recognize in yourself. Let me briefly introduce myself in case you are new. My name is Tamara. I'm an internationally and board certified trauma therapist. I'm licensed in mental health. I specialize in treating children, teens, and families, as well as adults who are dealing with trauma. Let's go ahead and jump in. So the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual has been referred to as the Bible of mental health, meaning that it's a little bigger than a dictionary or an encyclopedia, in which we look at all of the labels that we have created as human beings to kind of give us some common language and bill insurance. But the DSM can also be helpful in certain situations. I'm not a big fan of the DSM because in my experience, in my mind, the DSM is a book full of labels that man has come up with to kind of categorize a syndrome, characterize symptoms and behaviors that don't always fit the model of the DSM. So we could have, let's say, post-traumatic stress disorder and not show all the A, B, C, and D criteria that we have to meet to be diagnosed with PTSD. I'll give you an example. Maybe you have experienced racial trauma. There is nothing in the DSM that highlights the post-traumatic stress that you are likely to experience if you encounter racism, if you encounter prolonged discrimination, or you're trying to heal from intergenerational trauma. There is nothing in the DSM that focuses on that. So it's limited. But for today's video, I'm going to highlight something that is new in the DSM, and that is known as prolonged grief disorder. So prolonged grief disorder basically is this. It occurs when a loss happens or a death happens, a tragic event happens, and it interferes with your ability to adapt. Adaptation, or your ability to adapt to the situation. It's almost like the grief overpowers your ability to cope. And so because of that, it's prolonged. Now, there are a couple of things that may cause this prolonged grief disorder. One thing is prolonged acute grief. But I'm going to put the definition right here on the screen, meaning that it's a new grief, but it's prolonged, longer than it should last, and it's acute, meaning so many weeks to a month. And then you can get over the grief, or you can learn to live with it, or accept it, I should say. So prolonged acute grief. There is also maladaptive thoughts. I caused that person's death. My mother didn't love me, which is why she abused me. I'm not worthy of love. I'm not worthy of affection. I have a mental illness because something is wrong with me. I deserve the punishment my father gave me. Why can't I be loved? I never will be. Those are maladaptive thoughts. They are negative thoughts that have no real reality or basis. Now, the next thing is dysfunctional behaviors such as, avoidance, minimization, displacement. So instead of working with what's happening to you on the inside of you, you displace it onto somebody else. You may be having those maladaptive negative thoughts of, no one loves me, I'm never going to be loved, I'm a failure, I'm not attractive, nobody wants me in their life. And you may take all those negative thoughts and just place them onto somebody else and start creating problems with that other person. You may become jealous or envious of their life. You may find yourself really obsessed with what's going on with the other person. You know, you start to kind of displace your emotions, and you create another area of life that you can focus on, even though the real issue is inside of you. Another thing is emotional dysregulation, having a hard time regulating your emotions in a mature way, in a way that's going to help you progress, and in a way that is going to help you grieve that loss appropriately or that trauma you've experienced, so that you can move on to the stage of post-traumatic growth. Now, right up here in this video, I talk about post-traumatic growth. I'm really way overdue for updating that video. It's an older video. I'm going to be coming out at some point with a new video on post-traumatic growth, but go ahead and check that out. I think it'll give you some insight. So let me go down some of the specific symptoms of prolonged grief disorder, okay? The first is known as counter-factual thinking. I had to think for a minute, what? So here's what happens with this. The human mind has a really difficult time processing the trauma, processing the thoughts of the trauma, of the loss, of the grief, so much so that your brain begins to create alternative life events or alternative possibilities of that situation. For example, traumatic bonding is a situation where, you know, you're having a hard time meshing or pulling together the idea that your mother can be abusive and, you know, rude and hateful and angry and negative on this side of life, but then go over here on this side of your life and really show you love and really show you compassion and really, you know, make you feel like she's proud of you. So you have two of those images of your parent. And so it's hard to bring those two contrasting elements together. And so what do? You begin to drop the negative side. If you really feel desperate on the inside to have a mother, you don't want to walk away or you feel you can't, you drop that negative side and you hold as number one identity of your mom, the good side. Then you recognize that, wait a minute, there's two sides to my parent, and I'm not sure how to marry these two. So you continue the relationship because you don't know how to marry the two, and you really need a mom, right? So you don't run away, you stay. And so that's traumatic bonding. It basically says, I don't care who you are to me when you're mean, I need the good side of you, so much so that I'm going to stay here. Well, if you have counterfactual thinking, you're going to create possibilities for the situation that you are traumatized by or struggling with. My mom may have been abusive to me, and she may have burned my hands and my feet with her cigarettes, but she was really depressed. Or my dad grabbed me by my collar and thrust me up against the wall and choked me until I almost passed out. But that was then, this is now. Maybe my mother got into a car crash because she was tired and I wasn't a good daughter and I didn't give her support. Another one may be, maybe I was raped because of what I wore and not because of who I am. It's too painful to say, okay, I was sexually assaulted because of this other person that isn't a good person. You create another possibility, which is, it was because of what I was wearing. I shouldn't have wore that dress. It attracts men. So you find or create different alternatives or possibilities to that situation you are having a problem with accepting. Now, the next thing is something known as self-blame and derailing of adaptation. So you blame yourself. I'm the reason why I was abused by my mother. I'm the reason why I was abused by my father. I'm the reason why I dropped out of college and started drinking alcohol and doing drugs. I'm the reason why my family is so messed up, and they refer to me as the black sheep of the family. It's all my fault. While you do that, while you engage in self-blame and self-deprivation and avoidance of the truth of the situation, you're actually prolonging your grief, because it's like you're putting up this brick wall that gets in the way of your ability to process the grief. And that defense wall is all the different different things you're coming up with to blame yourself, because it's really painful to look at all the reasons or the possibilities. You may also thwart, if I can say it, or throw off or derail your healing process because you're blaming as opposed to working through the reality of that traumatic situation. So that's another stage. Now, another stage is prolonged intense stress, and that's basically chronic stress. When you are experiencing prolonged grief, you're actually prolonging the stress that is associated with that situation. The more you stay in denial, the more you stay in depression, the longer you stay in anger, the more you stay in bargaining, right? Maybe bargaining with the person or bargaining with God. Here's a definition of bargaining right here on the screen. You prolong those intense emotions, the anger, the fear, the resentment, the regret, the shame, the blame. You extend that process because you're not working through it, and you prolong your distress. It certainly isn't your fault, and I want to make sure that I put that out here, that I'm not blaming. I don't want you to feel that way. I'm just serving you the reality of what prolonged grief disorder is, so that you can look at this and say, wait a minute, I think I'm doing this, but this is not your fault. This is basically what the brain does to adapt to reality. Now, you may also feel like you are in a lonely, dark place, and this lonely, dark place is in your mind. You may also see yourself in chambers within your mind or different rooms within your mind, right? We're not talking about dissociative identity disorder. We're talking about how you split as a way to kind of cope and process what has happened to you. So you have the happy you have the depressed you have the anger you, right? So you become all these different characters. So you may feel like you are in a dark, cold place that you cannot get out of. And in a sense, that is derailed grief. Here's a definition of derailed grief on the screen, if I can say it. I want you guys to do a little bit of research into this. Am I doing this? Am I derailing the grief process by some of the things that I'm actually doing? This is a complicated topic, and it's a topic I encourage you to bring up with your therapist if you're in therapy. Let me know in the comment section below what questions you have or experiences. Go ahead and hit that subscribe and bell button if you want to get more videos like this, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye-bye.